With a special consideration for America's 237th Independence Day, the Unity Coalition for Israel and DemocracyUnderAttack.com, together with the Center for Security Policy and many other groups, urged the Senate to reject the nomination of the transnationalist Samantha Power as U.S. representative to the UN. Thomas Jefferson and our founding fathers proclaimed and affirmed the United States of America as a sovereign nation subject to the laws of its own people, guided by providence, and set apart for a special and unique purpose in history. For this July 4th celebration, consider reading our Declaration of Independence aloud to friends and family. When in the course of human events, it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another, and to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and of nature's God entitle them. A decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires that they should declare the causes which impel them to the separation. We hold these truths to be self-evident. This is the reason we celebrate. Today is the 237th anniversary of the signing of the Declaration of Independence. America is a free nation and recognizes the fact with this famous document. And it's our right and duty to both remember liberty's just cause and to stir ourselves to take action in defending our moral constitution. There are three benchmarks for human rights in force in the world today. For 237 years, the Declaration of Independence of the United States of America has been the strongest and longest-lasting source for men and women of all creeds and ethnicities to secure individual, state, and national independence of the highest order. Our Declaration states that above the magistrates, above the kings and potentates, stand the rights of the individual. Another standard, the United Nations document, the 1948 Universal Declaration of Human Rights, or UDHR, is not an improvement, but does offer similar rights to those nations who subscribe to it. Since 1990, however, many of the original signers of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights have disregarded it in favor of the Cairo Declaration on Human Rights in Islam, an egregious distortion of the rights granted by the laws of nature and nature's God. In fact, Article 24 of the Cairo Declaration states, all the rights and freedoms stipulated in this declaration are subject to the Islamic Sharia. For those not yet familiar with Islamic Sharia law, the supreme law of public governance in Islamic countries that abide by it, its principles are completely antithetical to our beloved U.S. Declaration of Independence. But Samantha Power disregards this danger of Islam. Her transnationalist agenda completely subverts United States human rights supremacy and puts it on par with, of all nations, China. Listen to her justify putting an Islamic Sharia nation in the permanent UN Security Council. This, among many other of her proposed changes, would be devastating to U.S. sovereignty.
We have Russia, which is committing massive human rights abuses, massive crimes against humanity, and even, there are those who say are even on the verge of committing something resembling genocide in Chechnya. There's China, which has, to say the least, an unillustrious human rights record. There's the United States, which doesn't allow itself to be hemmed in by international law. But in the eyes of the rest of the world, we are the aggressor of late. We're more of an aggressor than Russia because we've left our own borders. The Security Council composition, Britain, France, China, Russia, and the United States, these are the World War II victors. What about representativeness now in today's world? What about just even on the basis of population? If the war on terrorism is the defining event of our time, can we really persist in having no country from the Middle East, no country with much of an Islamic tradition at all represented on the Security Council in any kind of permanent way? There are lots of things we could do. We could sort of decide that the Security Council no longer has the legitimacy that we once gave it, so we don't consider it sort of one-stop shopping. And we come up, maybe the Secretary General himself has to be the authorizer. Would we vest that power in him? Well, the United States probably wouldn't. Other countries might. It's the Permanent Five who will have to choose to vest authority in the United Nations. And unfortunately, most of the Permanent Five members, while they will bash the United Nations, will do very little to strengthen it. Very little to give Kofi Annan, for instance, a standing army or something that he could call upon if a genocide threatened tomorrow in Burundi, or in Gujarat in India, or in Aceh in Indonesia. There are so many cases where these kinds of crimes could happen again, and yet we are dependent on states to do the ponying up or the cowboying up, as is being said these days in Boston. States don't pony up for things outside their perceived national interest, again, unless we all get involved.
Texas Senator Ted Cruz is one who values American sentiment and recently warned against the nomination of Samantha Power in the following letter. The nomination of Samantha Power is deeply troubling. No nation has spilled more blood or sacrificed more for the freedom of others than ours. And yet, Ms. Power has publicly embraced the need for America to continue apologizing to the world for perceived transgressions, going so far as to explicitly urge instituting a doctrine of the mea culpa. She is yet another Obama nominee who has been sharply critical of our nation's strong support for Israel. She's an aggressive interventionist, supporting sending our men and women into harm's way for humanitarian causes. And she has strongly supported the expansion of international institutions and international law, including the International Criminal Court, the Anti-Ballistic Missile Treaty, and the Kyoto Protocol at the expense of U.S. sovereignty. Indeed, Ms. Power has publicly stated, "We have to believe in international law and binding ourselves to international standards in the interest of getting others bound to those standards." America needs a UN ambassador to be an advocate for our own interests at the UN, not an advocate of elevating UN interests over U.S. sovereignty and the rights of the American people. The Unity Coalition for Israel agrees with Senator Ted Cruz and has signed a Center for Security Policy letter which expresses the very same urgent sentiment to the Senate. Do not approve President Obama's nomination of Samantha Power to represent the U.S. in the UN. Follow the link below for more info and to sign on to the letter for yourself. uc4i.org. That's uc4i.org/no-to-power. And we urge you to call your senators now. Call the Congressional Switchboard at 202-224-3121.